The Empire had ruled 300 star systems for 10,000 years. They had conquered worlds, studied countless species, and built an empire that stretched across the galaxy. Their scientists believed they understood everything about life in the universe. They were proud, ancient, and certain of their superiority over all other beings. When their long-range sensors detected radio signals from a small blue planet called Earth, the Science Council grew curious. This species called themselves humans. They had only recently learned to travel beyond their own world. Their technology was primitive. They were short. They seemed unremarkable in every way. But they were collectors. They gathered specimens from every corner of the galaxy. They studied lesser species the way a child might study insects. And so the Science Council made a decision that would change the fate of their empire forever. They would take a human for study. High Commander was given the mission. He was a tall being with pale blue skin and 4 black eyes that showed no emotion. He had served the Empire for 300 years and had never failed in his duties. Taking one small creature from a primitive world seemed like a simple task. His ship arrived in Earth's solar system on a cold November evening. They hid behind the moon and scanned the planet below. The humans had no idea they were being watched. Their detection technology was far too weak to notice a stealth vessel. Studied the data his sensors collected. He needed a specimen that would be easy to take. Adults were too large and too suspicious. They traveled in groups and carried communication devices, but children were different. Children wandered alone. Children trusted strangers. Children were perfect. His sensors found what he was looking for in a small town in Pennsylvania. A 7-year-old girl was playing in the woods behind her home. She was alone. Her parents were inside the house, unaware that their daughter had wandered beyond the backyard. Her name, according to the identification documents in the house, was Lucy Palmer. The abduction took less than 30 seconds. A beam of light surrounded the girl. She did not even have time to scream before she vanished from the forest floor. The only evidence that she had ever been there was a small red shoe that fell from her foot as she was pulled into the sky. Dan and Palmer searched for their daughter until midnight. They called the police. They organized search parties. They walked through those woods 100 times, calling Lucy's name until their voices gave out. But they found nothing. No trace. No clue. No explanation for how a little girl could simply vanish. The case remained open for 2 years before the police quietly closed it. They assumed the worst. They told the Palmers to prepare themselves for the possibility that Lucy would never come home, but Dan refused to give up hope. They kept her bedroom exactly as she had left it. They kept her picture on the wall. They kept searching, even when everyone else stopped. Thousands of light years away, Lucy woke up in a white room with no windows. The walls hummed with strange energy. The air smelled wrong, like metal and something she could not name. She was lying on a cold table, and figures stood around her in the darkness. When the lights came on, Lucy screamed. The creatures looking down at her were not human. They were tall and thin, with blue skin that seemed to glow in the harsh light. They had 4 eyes each, and their mouths were small slits that did not move when they spoke. Their voices came from somewhere else, from devices around their necks that translated their words into sounds Lucy could understand. "The specimen is awake," one of them said. "Begin initial assessment." Lucy did not know what those words meant, but she understood that she was in danger. She tried to run, but straps held her to the table. She tried to scream, but her voice echoed uselessly in the empty room. She tried to bite the hand that reached toward her, and she managed to sink her teeth into blue flesh before they pulled away. The creature she had bitten stared at its hand with what might have been surprise. Green blood dripped from the wound. It looked at its companions and said something in a language Lucy did not understand. They all seemed confused. They had not expected resistance. They had not expected pain. The lead scientist was named. He had studied 100 different species during his long career. He had never encountered one that fought back so quickly, so fiercely, with so little regard for its own safety. He made a note in his records. Human specimen displays unusual aggression. Emotional responses are stronger than anticipated. Further study required. Over the following days, Lucy refused to cooperate. She would not eat the food they gave her. She threw it at the walls. She screamed until her throat was raw. She cried for her mother, for her father, for anyone who might hear her and come to help. But no help came. She was alone, surrounded by monsters, trapped in a nightmare from which she could not wake. They watched her with growing interest. They had expected a simple creature, easy to control, easy to study. Instead, they had captured something that burned with an inner fire they could not explain. This small human child, this fragile being from a primitive world, seemed to contain an endless supply of defiance. Stood outside her containment cell and watched her through the transparent wall. She was sitting in the corner, hugging her knees to her chest, staring at him with eyes full of hatred. She was only 7 years old, but those eyes held something ancient, something fierce, something that made even a 300-year-old scientist feel uncomfortable. "What are you?" he whispered to himself. Lucy could not hear him through the wall, but if she could have answered, she would have told him the truth. She was a human child. She was scared and alone and far from home, but she was also her father's daughter, stubborn to her core. She was her mother's child, full of love that could not be broken. And she would never, ever stop fighting. They had made a terrible mistake. They had looked at humanity and seen only weakness. They had looked at a child and seen only a specimen. They did not understand what they had truly taken. They did not understand that humans were not defined by their technology or their short lives or their small bodies. Humans were defined by their hearts, and Lucy Palmer's heart was stronger than anything the Empire had ever encountered. They would learn this lesson eventually, but by then it would be far too late. 5 years passed in the cold silence of space. Lucy Palmer was no longer the frightened 7-year-old who had screamed and cried in her cell. She was 12 now, taller and thinner, with eyes that had seen too much and learned too well. They believed they had finally broken her spirit. They saw a quiet girl who followed their instructions and submitted to their tests without resistance. They saw exactly what Lucy wanted them to see. In truth, Lucy had spent every single day of her captivity preparing. She had stopped fighting with her fists because she realized that fighting was useless against creatures 3 times her size. Instead, she fought with her mind. She watched everything. She listened to every conversation. She memorized every detail of the research station where they kept her. The station orbited a massive structure filled with laboratories and containment cells. Lucy was not the only prisoner. There were creatures from a dozen different worlds held in cells throughout the station. Some were small and furry. Some were large and covered in scales. Some had no shape at all, just clouds of colored gas that floated sadly in their containers. All of them were specimens to nothing more than objects to be studied. Lucy learned the language within 2 years. She pretended to struggle with it, speaking slowly and making mistakes on purpose, so they would never know how well she truly understood them. She listened to the scientists talk about their experiments. She listened to the guards complain about their shifts. She listened to everything, and she remembered everything. The lead scientist found her progress fascinating. He visited her cell every day to run tests and ask questions. He treated her like a pet, speaking to her in simple words and rewarding her with better food when she behaved. He never suspected that she was studying him just as carefully as he studied her. Lucy learned that technology operated on something called emotional resonance. Their machines responded to the feelings of those who used them. A calm mind could open a door. A focused thought could activate a console. They had evolved to suppress their emotions, to think coldly and logically about everything. Their technology was designed for beings who felt very little. But humans were different. Humans felt everything, deeply and powerfully. Lucy realized that her emotions, the same emotions they found so confusing, might be the key to her escape. She tested her theory in small ways at first. When a guard left his access panel unattended, she touched it and thought about her mother. She thought about the warmth of her mother's hugs, the smell of her hair, the sound of her voice. The panel flickered. It did not open, but it flickered. That was enough. Lucy knew she was right. She spent the next 2 years practicing in secret. She learned to focus her emotions like a weapon. She learned to push her feelings into technology and make it respond to her will. It was exhausting work. It gave her headaches that lasted for days, but she never stopped. She could not stop. Her parents were waiting for her somewhere out there in the stars, and she would find her way back to them. On the night of her escape, Lucy waited until the station entered its rest cycle. The lights dimmed. The guards changed shifts. The scientists went to their quarters to sleep. Lucy sat in her cell and closed her eyes. She thought about home. She thought about the forest behind her house. She thought about her father teaching her to ride a bicycle. She thought about her mother reading her bedtime stories. She thought about love, pure and simple, the love of a child for her parents. The door of her cell slid open without a sound. Lucy moved quickly through the corridors. She had memorized the layout over 5 years of observation. She knew where the guards would be. She knew where the security systems were weakest. She knew exactly where she needed to go. Her first stop was the communication array. It was located at the center of the station, protected by heavy doors and complex locks. Lucy placed her hands on the access panel and thought about her father's face. The panel turned green. The doors opened. She stepped inside and found herself surrounded by glowing screens and humming machines. She had watched send messages many times. She knew how the system worked. She found the controls for long-range transmission and entered coordinates she had memorized from a researcher's. The coordinates led to a human deep space probe, the farthest object from Earth that might still receive a signal. Lucy leaned close to the microphone and spoke clearly. "This is Lucy Palmer. I am American. I was taken from Earth 5 years ago. I am being held on a research station in space. Please come find me. Please tell my parents I am alive." She repeated the message 3 times, then shut down the array. She did not know if anyone would hear her. She did not know if anyone would come. But she had done everything she could. The rest was up to her people. Her second stop was the containment wing. She moved from cell to cell, using her emotions to open every door. The creatures inside stared at her with confusion and fear. They did not understand who she was or what she was doing. But when she gestured for them to follow, they did. They were prisoners too. They knew an escape when they saw one. By the time the alarms finally sounded, Lucy had released 37 specimens. The station descended into chaos. Creatures ran through the corridors in every direction. Guards shouted orders that no one followed. Scientists scrambled to contain subjects that had spent years waiting for exactly this moment. Lucy found a small storage room and hid inside. She curled up in the corner and listened to the chaos outside. She was exhausted. Her head was pounding. But for the first time in 5 years, she smiled. She did not know what would happen next. She did not know if her message would reach Earth or if anyone would believe it. But she had done something the thought impossible. She had escaped her cage. She had proven that she was not a specimen, not an object, not something to be studied and controlled. She was Lucy Palmer, daughter of Dan, and a human being from a small town in Pennsylvania. And she was never going to stop fighting until she found her way home. 3 weeks later, her message reached the human probe. 1 week after that, it reached Earth. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you took a child from humanity. The message arrived on a Tuesday morning. A technician at the Deep Space Communications Center in New Mexico was drinking his coffee when his screen began to flash. He almost ignored it. The probe that sent the signal was old, launched decades ago, and usually only transmitted routine data. But something about the pattern made him look closer. When he heard the voice of a young girl speaking English from somewhere beyond the edge of human space, he dropped his coffee cup. It shattered on the floor, but he did not notice. He was already running to find his supervisor. Within 6 hours, the message had reached the highest levels of government. Experts analyzed the transmission. They confirmed it was genuine. The voice belonged to a child, approximately 12 years old, speaking with an American accent. The coordinates pointed to a region of space that humanity had never explored, deep in the territory of an alien empire that humans had only recently learned existed. Lucy Palmer's parents were contacted that evening. Dan had spent 5 years living with hope that everyone told them was foolish. They had never stopped believing their daughter was alive. When the government officials showed them the transcript of Lucy's message, collapsed into her husband's arms and wept. Dan read the words over and over, his hands shaking, his eyes filled with tears. "She's alive," he whispered. "She's been alive this whole time." The news spread across the world within hours. Every screen, every radio, every device carried the same story. A human child had been taken by aliens. She was being held prisoner in a distant part of the galaxy, and she had sent a message home, begging for rescue. The reaction was unlike anything in human history. People who had never agreed on anything found themselves united by a single thought. A child was in danger. Their child. Humanity's child. And they were going to bring her home. Admiral Henry Cole was 63 years old. He had served in the Navy for 40 years and had commanded ships in every ocean on Earth. When humanity discovered they were not alone in the universe, he was chosen to lead the newly formed Space Defense Force. He had spent the past decade building a fleet of warships, hoping they would never be needed. Now they were needed. Cole stood before a room full of generals, admirals, and government officials. A map of the galaxy glowed on the screen behind him. A small red dot marked Lucy's location, impossibly far from Earth, deep in enemy territory. "The Empire has 5,000 warships," Cole said. "We have 12. By any reasonable measure, this mission is impossible." He paused and looked around the room. Every face was grim. Every jaw was set with determination. "We're going anyway," Cole continued. "That little girl is waiting for us. Her parents are waiting for her. This is not a military operation. This is a rescue mission, and we will not fail." Captain Brooks was chosen to lead the fleet. She was 41 years old, a former rescue pilot who had saved hundreds of lives during her career. She had flown helicopters into hurricanes, ships into burning oil rigs, and aircraft into war zones. She was the best rescue commander humanity had ever produced. When she saw the mission briefing, she did not hesitate. She gathered her crew, boarded her ship, and began the journey into the unknown. The fleet consisted of 12 vessels. The flagship was a carrier called the Endurance, a massive ship that carried fighters, soldiers, and enough firepower to level a city. The other 11 ships were smaller, faster, designed for quick strikes and rapid escapes. They were not built to fight an empire. They were built to get in, grab their target, and get out. The journey to space took 3 months. The crew spent that time preparing for every possible scenario. They trained for combat. They studied technology. They learned everything they could about the research station where Lucy was being held. They knew the odds were against them. They did not care. Brooks walked the corridors of the Endurance every night, talking to her crew, learning their names, listening to their stories. She found that almost everyone on board had a personal reason for being there. One pilot had a daughter Lucy's age. One soldier had lost a sister to a kidnapping years ago. One engineer simply said that no child should ever be left behind, no matter how far away they were. "We're not just fighting for Lucy," told her officers during one of their final briefings. "We're fighting for the idea that humanity protects its own. If we let them take our children without consequence, we invite every predator in the galaxy to see us as prey. This mission is about more than one girl. It's about who we are as a species." When the fleet finally reached the border of space, they found exactly what they expected. 200 warships were waiting for them, a wall of metal and weapons stretching across the stars. The commander sent a message demanding their immediate surrender. Brooks sat in her command chair and looked at the enemy fleet on her screen. 200 ships. Each one was larger than anything humanity had ever built. Each one was armed with weapons that could tear through human armor like paper. The math was simple. The odds were impossible. She opened a channel to the commander. Her voice was calm and steady when she spoke. "This is Captain Brooks of the Earth vessel Endurance. You are holding a human child prisoner. Her name is Lucy Palmer. She is 12 years old. We are here to take her home." The commander laughed. It was a strange sound, cold and hollow, transmitted through the speakers of her bridge. "You have 12 ships," he said. "We have 200. Turn back now or you will all die." Brooks smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "You took our child," she said. "Did you really think we would let you keep her?" She closed the channel and turned to her crew. Every face was ready. Every heart was set. "All ships," she said, "prepare to attack." The first ship exploded before its crew even understood what was happening. The humans did not fight the way they expected. They did not form neat battle lines. They did not follow predictable patterns. They flew straight into the heart of the enemy fleet, weaving between the massive warships like insects around giants, striking at weak points that should have been impossible to reach. High Commander watched from his command vessel with growing confusion. He had fought 100 battles during his long career. He had defeated species far more advanced than humanity, but he had never seen anything like this. "They are not retreating," one of his officers reported. "Their ships are damaged, but they continue to attack." "That is illogical," replied. "They cannot win. They must know they cannot win." But the humans did not seem to care about winning. They cared about something else, something they could not understand. They cared about reaching the research station. They cared about saving one little girl, and they were willing to die to do it. Captain Brooks flew the Endurance through a storm of enemy fire. Her ship shook with every impact. Alarms screamed warnings about hull damage and failing systems, but she did not turn back. She could not turn back. Lucy was waiting. Around her, the human fleet was taking heavy losses. 3 ships were already gone, torn apart by weapons. Two more were badly damaged, limping through the battle on emergency power. But the survivors kept fighting. They kept pushing forward. They kept dying one by one to clear a path through the enemy line. "Captain, the frigate Collins is reporting critical damage," her communications officer said. "They're requesting permission to withdraw." Looked at the tactical display. The Collins was burning, its hull cracked open in a dozen places. It should have been dead already. But its crew was still fighting, still launching missiles at enemy targets, still refusing to give up. "Tell them to hold position," said. "We need them to draw fire while we push through." She knew what she was asking. She was asking those men and women to die so others could live. It was the hardest order she had ever given. But she gave it anyway, because that was what the mission required. The Collins held its position for another 11 minutes. It destroyed 2 more warships before a final barrage tore it apart. There were no survivors. 63 human beings died in an instant, their names added to a list that was growing longer with every passing moment. On the research station, Lucy watched the battle through a viewport she had found in an abandoned observation room. She could see the human ships, tiny specks of light against the massive fleet. She could see them dying, one after another, their lights winking out as they were destroyed. They were dying for her. She did not know their names. She did not know their faces. But they had crossed the galaxy to save her, and now they were giving their lives so she could go home. Tears streamed down her face as she pressed her hands against the cold glass. "Please," she whispered, "please do not die for me." But they kept dying, and they kept fighting. The turning point came 4 hours into the battle. A human destroyer called the Valor had taken too much damage to continue fighting. Its engines were dead. Its weapons were offline. It was drifting through space, waiting for them to finish it off. Instead of surrendering, the crew made a different choice. They aimed their dying ship at the nearest carrier and fired their remaining thrusters. The Valor crossed the distance in seconds, too fast for them to react. When it struck the carrier's hull, both ships exploded in a flash of light that could be seen from 1,000 miles away. 212 humans died in that moment. They took 3,000 with them. After that, something changed in the battle. The fleet began to hesitate. They had never encountered an enemy willing to use their own ships as weapons. They had never faced a species that would choose death over surrender. Fear began to spread through their ranks, a cold terror that their commanders could not control. "They are insane," said, his voice filled with disbelief. "They are completely insane." He was wrong. The humans were not insane. They were simply fighting for something more important than their own survival. They were fighting for a child they had never met, a girl who had been stolen from her home and held prisoner for 5 years. They were fighting because that was what humans did when someone hurt their young. The Endurance broke through the enemy line at hour 6. 47 warships had been destroyed. The remaining 153 were in chaos, their formation broken, their commanders arguing about what to do. No one had expected this. No one had prepared for an enemy that fought like this. Brooks did not waste time celebrating. She pushed forward at maximum speed, heading straight for the research station. Her ship was badly damaged. Half her systems were offline, but she was close now. So close. "All remaining ships cover our approach," she ordered. "We are going in to get our girl." The other human vessels formed a protective ring around the Endurance. There were only 5 of them left, battered and broken, held together by nothing but willpower and hope. But they held their positions. They took fire meant for the flagship. They gave everything they had left. On the station, Lucy saw the Endurance approaching. It was the largest ship in the human fleet, its hull and burned from battle, but still moving, still fighting, still coming for her. She ran through the corridors toward the docking bay. Alarms were screaming everywhere. Guards were running in every direction, confused and frightened. No one tried to stop her. No one even noticed her. They were too busy preparing for what was coming. Lucy reached the docking bay just as the Endurance connected with the station. The doors opened, and human soldiers poured through, their weapons raised, their faces set with grim determination. The first soldier to see Lucy was a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice. "Are you Lucy Palmer?" she asked. Lucy nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. The soldier smiled and held out her hand. "Come on, sweetheart," she said. "We are taking you home." The Empire surrendered Lucy Palmer without further resistance. High Commander personally delivered the formal transfer documents to Captain Brooks aboard the Endurance. He expected the humans to be grateful. He expected them to accept their victory and leave quietly. He expected the matter to be closed. He was wrong about everything. Brooks stood on the bridge of her damaged ship and looked at the commander. He was tall and proud, with 4 black eyes that showed no emotion. He had ordered the abduction of a human child. He had kept her prisoner for 5 years. And now he stood before her as if nothing had happened, as if the hundreds of humans who had died to reach this moment meant nothing at all. "The specimen is being brought to your vessel," said. "You may take her and go." Said nothing, she simply waited. A few minutes later, the door opened. A young girl walked through, escorted by human soldiers on either side. She was thin and pale, wearing a simple gray uniform that hung loose on her small frame. Her hair was cut short. Her eyes were too old for her face, filled with shadows that no 12-year-old should carry. But when she saw, those eyes filled with tears. "Are you taking me home?" Lucy whispered. Knelt down so she could look the girl in the eye. She took Lucy's hands in her own and held them gently. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, "we are taking you home." The journey back to Earth took 3 months. Lucy spent most of that time in the medical bay, recovering from 5 years of captivity. The doctors treated her body. The counselors tried to help her mind. But the best medicine was simpler than anything they could provide. Every day, Brooks visited Lucy's room. She brought books and games and stories about Earth. She told Lucy about her parents who were waiting for her, counting the days until their daughter came home. She told her about the world she had missed, the changes and the constants, the familiar things that would still be there when she returned. Lucy listened to everything. She asked questions about her parents, about her old home, about the forest where she used to play. She was afraid that she would not recognize anything, that 5 years had changed too much, that she would be a stranger in her own life. "What if they do not remember me?" she asked one night. Smiled and shook her head. "They never stopped looking for you," she said. "Not for a single day. Your father still walks through those woods every evening, hopping to find you. Your mother keeps your room exactly the way you left it. They remember you, Lucy. They have been waiting for this moment for 5 years." When the Endurance finally entered Earth's solar system, every ship in the human fleet came out to meet them. Thousands of vessels, from massive carriers to tiny personal craft, formed a corridor of honor through which the battered flagship passed. Cheers and tears filled the communications channels. The entire world was watching. The entire world was celebrating. Lucy stood on the bridge with and looked at the planet growing larger in the viewport. She had dreamed of this moment every night for 5 years. She had imagined it so many times that she was afraid it might not be real. But it was real. She could see the blue oceans and green continents. She could see the clouds swirling over familiar shapes. She could see home. The ship landed at a military base in Pennsylvania, not far from the town where Lucy had grown up. A crowd of thousands had gathered to welcome her, held back by barriers and security officers. Cameras flashed from every direction. Reporters shouted questions that no one answered. But Lucy did not see any of them. She only saw 2 figures standing at the front of the crowd, held back by a simple rope that they clearly wanted to push past. Her parents. Dan Palmer looked older than she remembered. His hair was gray now, and his face was lined with years of worry and grief. Palmer looked smaller, thinner, as if the weight of missing her daughter had pressed down on her for so long that she had begun to fade. But when they saw Lucy, their faces transformed. Years of pain melted away in an instant. They pushed past the rope and ran toward their daughter, arms open, tears streaming down their faces. Lucy ran too. She ran faster than she had ever run in her life. And when she crashed into her parents' arms, when she felt them wrap around her and hold her tight, when she heard her mother's voice saying her name over and over again, she knew that everything she had been through was worth it. She was home. The years that followed changed everything. Humanity did not forget what the Empire had done. They did not forgive. They built 1,000 new warships. They established listening posts across the galaxy, watching for any threat to their people. They created an organization called the Homecoming Division, dedicated to one single purpose: no human child would ever be taken again. The Empire watched with growing fear as humanity expanded into the stars. They had expected the primitive species to fade into insignificance. Instead, humans became one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. Other species looked at what had happened and drew their own conclusions. The humans had crossed the galaxy for one child. They had sacrificed hundreds of lives without hesitation. They had defeated a fleet 20 times their size through sheer determination and love. No one wanted to find out what they would do if truly provoked. 50 years later, the Empire was a shadow of its former self. Their power had faded. Their influence had crumbled. They were a footnote in galactic history, remembered only as the species foolish enough to steal a human child. And in a small town in Pennsylvania, an old woman named Lucy Palmer sat on her porch and watched her play in the woods behind her house. She was 62 now, with gray hair and gentle eyes. The shadows of her captivity had never completely faded, but they had grown softer with time. She had built a good life. She had found happiness. She had come home. Her granddaughter ran up to her, with a worried look on her face. "Grandma, I'm scared of the dark," the little girl said. Lucy smiled and lifted the child onto her lap. She held her close and looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the evening sky. "Do not be afraid," she said softly. "No matter how dark it gets, no matter how far away you are, someone will always come to find you. Someone will always bring you home." The little girl relaxed in her grandmother's arms, comforted by words that came from a place of deep and certain truth. Lucy looked at the stars one more time, remembering the friends who had died to save her, the parents who had never stopped hopping, the species that had crossed the galaxy for one little girl. Then she looked down at her granddaughter and smiled. "We always protect our own," she whispered. "That is what makes us human."